All right, everybody, welcome. This is the Do Dissidents podcast, a special midweek edition. Keaton Weiss here with Russell Dobular.
Hello.
And this is a midweek stream here. We have a couple of patron callers on the line. Judith and Kevin was here just a second ago. Not sure where Kevin went, but you can watch here on YouTube. If you're a patron or a paid Substack subscriber, you, of course, have call-in access to this show. So if any of our callers want to turn on their mic and or their camera at any time and say hi, they are welcome, of course, to do that. We apologize. We were a bit late this evening. We were figuring out something with Russell's microphone.
It was very broadcast news, that whole coming into the show today.
Yeah, right, exactly. Little sound mishap. Russell is back in his Northeast studio, back in New York City there with his signature bookshelf in back of him.
But New Orleans is in my heart.
New Orleans is right over his heart, on his chest area, right above where his heart ostensibly is or would be if he had one.
If I had one.
Exactly. So we thought we would come on midweek this week and do a midweek stream. Like I said, we do want to start adding live streams to the itinerary, and we're just experimenting with different time slots and things like that. And so we hope that this is coming through loud and clear and that we get a little audience in here this evening. We have a few things that we wanted to talk about. The Young Turks' sort of tough on crime stance that they have been making some noise about online in recent weeks, and it sort of came to a bit of a head when Cenk got involved 2 days ago. And we have some Matt Walsh commentary on the casting of the Little Mermaid movie that we think is kind of fun. But we also want to start, I suppose, with the most serious news of the week, which is that Lindsey Graham is introducing a bill that would ban abortion nationwide past the 15-week point. And he's sort of bucking party leadership on this because, of course, Mitch McConnell has come out and said that he thinks we should just leave it up to the states and have that be that. He made a little bit of a chirp when Roe was first overturned that, hey, yeah, maybe a national ban is something we might look at. But since then, he has backed off of that. And I would assume that a recent momentum shift in terms of midterm polling and certain special elections going the Democrats' way probably gave McConnell and party leadership some pause about going full steam ahead with a nationwide ban. Lindsey Graham came out and did this, introduced a bill that he was sure would not even come up for a vote in the Senate because the Democrats control the Senate, and Chuck Schumer is, of course, not going to bring this up for a vote. But Lindsey Graham did this for reasons that are the subject of some speculation. My suspicion is that Graham did this in order to sort of try and find a sort of sweet spot between appeasing the Christian right base, who is probably not going to be satisfied with leaving it up to the states. These are people who think that abortion is murder. You wouldn't leave murder up to the states, right? You wouldn't say, well, murder is legal in California.
In Texas.
Well, oddly enough, yeah, Texas. Well, Texas is one of these states that actually has a full-on ban in effect right now.
And where I just was. It was very interesting.
Louisiana,
Yeah, I'm on Bourbon Street, like the sex capital of the United States, and pro-choice protesters were going down Bourbon Street.
That's right.
Of all the places to make abortion illegal.
Exactly. Yeah, Bourbon Street. A lot of pregnancies began on Bourbon Street. A lot of lives began on Bourbon Street.
There's actually a study. I believe today every American has at least one descendant who was conceived on Bourbon Street.
Conceived on Bourbon Street, right. We're all brothers and sisters of Bourbon Street in some way.
Under the skin.
Kevin, one of our paid Substack subscribers, put in the private chat here, which only Russell and I and the patrons on the call can see, which is pretty funny. But I'll get to that when we get to that segment, which is going to be our third segment. But I promise I will read that because I appreciate that line. Anyway, what I think he's doing here is sort of throwing some red meat to the diehard Christian right base who, you know, just logically speaking, if they feel that life begins at a certain point before the baby comes out, whether it is conception or 12 weeks or 6 weeks or 15 weeks, then they're not going to be content with simply leaving this decision to the states, because all joking aside, you wouldn't leave a question like murder up to the states. You wouldn't say, if you're anti-murder, you wouldn't say, well, sure, Oregon can legalize murder, and then if South Carolina wants to criminalize murder, then I guess they can do that if they want, right? You wouldn't really be satisfied with that. And so the GOP is in a position where they've been catering to this very, hard right evangelical base for so long now that there's really nowhere to go but further to the right in a certain sense. So he's trying to throw some red meat to them.
That's the trap advocacy always falls into. Once you achieve your objective, there's no place to go but to troll the other side with more and more extreme positions. What else can you do from there?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, it's not just trolling the other side. In this case, they're actually serious. Like when these evangelicals say, "Hey, abortion's murder," they mean it. They're not fucking. That's their belief.
I'm not saying they're kidding. I'm saying for the politicians and particularly NGOs whose bread and butter come from ginning those people up, there's the only place you can go once you've achieved victory is further, right? You have to go further and further away from what's actually a mainstream position, which this never was. I mean, not to say never, but the idea that all abortion should be illegal has not been a mainstream point of view in the United States for a very long time. But now that they've achieved it, I mean, it's not just the politicians. How many political action committees are built around the premise of overturning Roe v. Wade? What do you think? All those people are going to go get real jobs now? They got to come up with new fights to fundraise off of.
Oh, sure. No, absolutely. So, yeah, there's definitely a part of this that is about throwing red meat to the diehard base. But the thing that's sort of sleazy and very calculating about it is that he also, at the same time, is trying to assuage the fears of a lot of maybe moderate independent voters who don't want a full-on nationwide abortion ban. In other words, by introducing a nationwide ban past 15 weeks, what Lindsey Graham is sort of attempting to do is define the point at which life begins for the entire nation, right? He's trying to set a standard. Okay, we're not going to ban abortion nationwide outright. We're only going to ban it past 15 weeks. Now, it turns out 9 out of 10 abortions that happen are within the first 15 weeks. So what he's hoping to do here is make the sort of evangelical base happy by saying, yes, we are taking this national, but he's also trying to send a signal to a lot of moderates that, hey, we're not going to ban this outright. What he's basically saying is that in the U.S., we are going to recognize that life begins at 15 weeks. So he's not so much commenting on whether or not murder is illegal nationwide or not. He's basically just trying to set a national standard for what we recognize as murder versus what we don't. And he's saying 15 weeks is the point. And it's interesting to sort of try and predict how it's going to play politically. I mean, the party leadership seems to not think very favorably of what he's done to them here, because ultimately, if their line is, well, we're going to leave this up to the states, then they don't want this senator going rogue and saying, okay, let's do something more national.
Ixnay
because
on
that
the
is an
abortion
overreach. Right, exactly. But on the other hand, this will put certain Democrats in certain states this cycle in a little bit of a defensive posture here. Like I listened to an interview with Stacey Abrams on some TV show, right? And they asked her, they said, do you think abortion should be legal up until birth, or do you believe in any restrictions at a certain point, in the cycle? Because what Graham is saying is that at 15 weeks, basically the fetus develops consciousness and is capable of feeling pain, and past that point, it is inhumane to abort the baby. And so they asked her, they say, do you believe in any restrictions at all? And Abrams was kind of unsure about how to answer that question because as a gubernatorial candidate in a state like Georgia,
Republicans.
What's that?
It's the other side of what Republican politicians have to deal with when they're asked, do you believe there should be any exceptions to banning abortion?
Well, sure,
It's
right.
It's
exactly.
that question where there's just no good answer.
Right. There's no good answer because, if you say,
Politically.
yes, there should be exceptions for rape and incest, then your diehard base says,
Right.
well, if the baby is a product of rape, it's not the baby's fault. So why would you
It's
be
still
for
murder.
this, right? It's still murder, right? So, but of course, most sensible people think, of course, there should be exceptions carved out for that if you are going to be going as far as to ban abortion, which of course you shouldn't. But, Abrams didn't quite know how to answer that question because that's a tough question. It's a tough question for most politicians. It's especially tough when you're running for governor in a state like Georgia, which has a large pro-life base. And there are a lot of moderate voters who probably feel like, yeah, abortion should be legal up to a certain point, but late-term abortion shouldn't be, right? And what Graham has said is that, like, most European countries have some restrictions in terms of when you can and can't terminate. And what he's saying is that, look, 15 weeks, that 15-week mark is basically a mainstream opinion throughout most of the first world. There are several European countries, in fact, most European countries have some laws on the books restricting abortion past that 15-week period. What he doesn't say, though, is that those countries like France and Germany, which he has cited, carve out very broad exceptions for physical health of the mother, mental health of the mother, what the mother's economic prospects are. Is she going to be able to care for the baby? Is the baby going to have a stable home, right? Whereas this law that he floated factors in none of that, right? And so, look, I mean, at a certain point, I mean, if to whoever knows this show well, they know that we don't really dabble in sort of knee-jerk identity politics reactions to things. This is sexism, not in the sense that it expresses an open contempt and hatred for women, but it does express a certain ignorance of what it means to be pregnant, right? And what it does to a woman physically and mentally, and just how that process works in general. You have Lindsey Graham here, a single gay man, who is floating this bill. You see, delayed reaction to that.
Well, because
I thought you took me seriously. I didn't go. I thought you just took it at face value that he's gay. I was saying that jokingly. This guy's sitting here like a stone.
What it was, I'm sitting here. I'm like, God damn it! He said pregnant women. How are we going to walk that back now?
Oh, see, so you were. Oh, so I did two faux pas there.
I was like, do I correct him?
I outed Lindsey Graham, and I said pregnant women, not pregnant person. All right, so I was one ahead of you. You were still processing the first.
I was still, because I was shocked. Because I thought we were clear on this. That men.
No, but I mean, this just show an ignorance of that, and it shows a certain disregard for any problems that come up. I mean, first of all, I didn't even know what an atopic pregnancy was by name until this issue became foregrounded with the overturning of Roe. I had never heard atopic pregnancy. My wife knew what it was. She explained to me what it was. She used that term, and I asked, what is that? And then she, talked about what it was, and I had heard of, sort of pregnancy complications before.
Isn't your wife in medical school?
Well, she is. She just took her IBCLC exam, which is International Breastfeeding Consultant. So yeah, she deals with pregnancy issues quite a bit, so she knows this subject pretty inside and out. And so this does show a certain ignorance of that, and a certain sort of carefree attitude about that, a certain disregard. When Graham was confronted about this at a press conference about this woman who's saying, hey, look, what if my pregnancy goes south after 15 weeks? There was a woman who was forced to carry a baby to term because it had some horrible defect that they only found out about past 15 weeks. The baby was not viable. The baby suffered for, I think, 8 days, bled. She said it was a horrible video. I don't even want to play it because it's very upsetting. She said it bled out of every orifice. As soon as it was born, it was just bleeding, and it just bled out and died. It was horrible. And you're going to make these women carry those kinds of pregnancies to term. As long as their life is not in danger, what? No, you have to carry that to term? I mean, it's just depraved and sick. And even in these European countries which have banned abortions past 15 weeks, almost all of them, not that I'm an expert on every law of every European country, but from what I've read, almost all of them have very broad exceptions. Whereas, okay, if you find out there's something terribly wrong with the fetus past 15 weeks, you can choose to terminate the pregnancy. This carves out no room for that because it's ultimately just a fucking political. It's a cynical political ploy 6 weeks before the midterms. And so how it's going to work, I don't know. On the one hand, it does put a lot of swing state Democrats in statewide races in tough spots. It forces Stacey Abrams to answer some questions that she's probably not very comfortable answering. On the other hand, it does go further than even Mitch McConnell wants to go, and that's not going to be lost on a lot of Democrats and independents either. So we'll have to wait and see how it plays out, but I thought it was worth talking about for sure.
Listen, Mitch got on the phone with Lindsay, said, do you know how many TikTok videos we have lined up of teachers out in the middle of Idaho who want to put the whole class on puberty blockers, ready to go for the midterms, and you're putting the focus on this, you jackass?
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, that's the danger. That's the danger. And we're going to do some shows we're going to do very, very thorough coverage of the midterm elections. We do it better than anybody, I will say. Better than anybody in this space. Our election coverage is second to none. So make sure you turn in on November 8th for our election night coverage. And we're going to do very thorough breakdowns of all these primary races.
Last time we got a call from Steve Kornacki asking for a job. We were like, fuck you, man.
Yeah, well, fuck you. We got a Zoom screen.
You're tainted.
Exactly.
I don't like who you work with. I don't like where you work, the kind of coverage you do. You wouldn't fit in.
Right. Exactly. So, we will be breaking down these races more thoroughly, but you have seen some polling shifts back towards the Republicans' favor. Ron Johnson was up by 1 point over Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin. That marked a shift towards him from the last poll. Stacey Abrams is now down by 8 points against Brian Kemp in Georgia. Herschel Walker in the last poll was actually up a point over Warnock. And I forget the woman's first name in Nevada, the senator. She has a 3 name. She has a hyphenated last name, but her last name is Cortez Masto, the incumbent Democrat there. Mm-hmm. She's beating her Republican opponent by only 1 point. And there was one poll that had the Republican polling ahead there. So if Nevada's a dead heat, Wisconsin's a dead heat, Georgia's a dead heat, that suggests a little bit of a swing back to the Republicans to the point where, you don't know exactly why that is, but, certainly I would think the more voters' minds are on this abortion issue going into November 8th, the better it is for Democrats. And so conventional wisdom has to be that Graham sort of fucked them a little bit here.
He did. I keep saying this, and it's partly because I think I'm tuning in more to the conversation that's being had outside of left media than a lot of people in this space do. The Republicans are winning on every level of this conversation, except for abortion. Abortion is really all the Democrats have. And actually, ironically, Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness. That seems to have really helped him. He had a swing with young voters. He was 12 points underwater. Now he's actually 12 points in the black with voters under 45 because of the college loan forgiveness.
Sure. Well, that's what we said.
So those two things are very helpful to them. On the other hand, the right wing is very effectively using a campaign of showing the absolute worst cultural excesses of the left. TikTok is like the worst thing to ever happen to the left because they are having a field day digging up videos of the most batshit third grade teachers you can find and just pummeling the internet and the airwaves with them. And every day that they're doing that is a good day for them. Every day they're talking about abortion is a bad day for them. That's why Lindsey Graham doing that was dumb. That's why McConnell, whatever you think of him, he's shrewd. He understands that. That's why he's shutting it down.
Yeah, right. He knows what's good for the GOP and what's not. I mean, he is a very smart political operative. If an evil one, he's definitely smart. You certainly can't take that away from him.
Come on, man. Look at that. He's like anti-charismatic. He's like an anti-charisma zone. He looks like a turtle, and he's maintained this position longer than his last few predecessors met a pretty bad end holding that job. So, he's got to have some other dark talents to be maintaining that position, given how lacking in any other political skills he is.
Yeah, no, that's certainly a good point. Gina is on the chat, made a couple comments. I want to give a special shout out to Gina, who actually did become a patron after Sunday's show, or I believe during Sunday's show, when we promised all of our patrons the uncensored outtakes from our Kyle and Crystal engagement video. Those outtakes will be published tomorrow. I am going to put those up for patrons and paid Substack subscribers tomorrow, so you can support the show at patreon.com/do-dissidents. Those outtakes, like I said, are going to come out tomorrow. They will be out. Here's the catch. For a limited time. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we're not putting those up on our YouTube channel as an unlisted link. That's how we put most of our patron-exclusive content up. But the thing is, when you put something up on YouTube, it's prone to all sorts of fuckery. People can download the links off of YouTube and then publish it themselves, and all kinds of shit can happen when you put something up on YouTube, even if it's unlisted. So we are putting that up on our Vimeo channel, which will then be blasted out to patrons. In order to put it up on our Vimeo channel, though, we must subscribe for a paid Vimeo account. Now, we have no use for a paid Vimeo subscription. And so we are signing up for the 30-day free trial for Vimeo in order to put this piece up for our patrons. So you have 30 days to watch it, folks, and 30 days to enjoy it, and 30 days to relish it, after which we will be printing it out to a DVD, and we'll be selling it for the low price of $69.99 on dudissidents.com. But other than that, you're going to have a month to watch it. Hold on, a 1 month to watch it starting tomorrow for everybody. And if you haven't signed up, sign up. It's worth it. Patreon.com/do-dissidents. Go ahead, Russell.
I myself am looking forward to seeing my drunken ravings. I haven't seen it.
No, Russell has not seen it yet. Russell has not seen it yet.
I vaguely remember it, but I have not seen it. And
Only
we also have
new
Judith and Kevin sitting in here.
Yeah,
Judith,
patrons also get...
is that a new patron, Judith?
Judith has been a patron for a while, and Kevin is on the Substack, I believe. I don't think Kevin is through Patreon, but Kevin is for our Substack. But yeah, they're hanging out. Do any of you guys have any questions or comments? If you want to turn your mics on, you can, and then you can just mute them afterwards. Going once, going twice, Kevin or Judith. All right. Well, Kevin dropped a chat message, which we'll bring up in a second. But like I said, if you guys do want to join the show and talk, you guys are, of course, welcome to do that. All right, let's talk about Matt Walsh's beef with the Little Mermaid. Now, I'm going to play a video where he responds to a viewer's question about a previous show that he did. Russell, you apparently know the background of this. I did not. So why don't you set this up, what we're about to see? Put it in some context.
All right. So his original video was weighing in on the reaction to the trailer and the issues that it raises, and the question of whether it's appropriate or not to recast characters who were, he took on the, should James Bond be black? Should Superman be black? He just took on the whole subject. His take was predictable. Hey, why not just create? And this is also what you hear from a lot of nerds who, complain about this with diversifying Lord of the Rings and things like that. Why not just create a character of that race? Why race swap? And he got into some cases where race swapping is considered acceptable, and other cases where it's not, where there's a certain amount of hypocrisy there. But overall, he felt that we just shouldn't be caring about this at all. That basically his ultimate take was it should be okay no matter what. And he used the fact that Morgan Freeman in the Shawshank Redemption, even though it's a million years ago, was playing a character who was white in the story. And
in the short story.
In the short story. And he was very complimentary about his performance. They're saying, hey, he was perfect. So, okay, so if we can do that the other way, then we have no problem. But they would burn down cities if you recast Medea with Bob Odenkirk. So his issue was there's a double standard here where you're trying to remove white people from these characters, but you could never do it the other way. So that was his overall take. Now, the next day in his mailbag, in his segment on his show, he had somebody asking about that. And I guess you have the clip so we can.
Yeah, we will take a look.
Just show it.
Max Winter says, a black actor playing the Little Mermaid really is a case of white erasure. All forms of art, including fairy tales, are meant to be reflections of the author's experiences and observations. Hans Christian Andersen probably based the Little Mermaid based on experiences he went through in his home country of Denmark. So it makes sense that most of his characters would be white, since that's the world and the people he was surrounded by. Yeah, I'm given the way that we deal with these sorts of issues, I'm sympathetic to that. Now, I would be fine, like we talked about yesterday. We don't have to rehash the entire thing, but if we all agreed that race in films and TV shows, especially fictional stories, don't matter, and we're going to take a kind of colorblind casting approach, and it doesn't matter as long as the actor is good. If we could all agree on that, then I'd be on board. And as I said, that's basically what it was for many years, what it was back in the 90s. But what I cannot abide by is the double standard thing where we say, well, the casting in casting matters only for certain races and not for others. No, we're not doing that. Also, by the way, with The Little Mermaid, can we also just mention that just from a scientific perspective, okay, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have someone with darker skin who lives deep in the ocean. I mean, if anything, not only should the Little Mermaid be pale, she should actually be translucent. If you look at deep sea creatures, they're like translucent. They have no kind of pigmentation whatsoever. And they're just like these horrifying, they look like skeletons floating around in the ocean. That's what the Little Mermaid should look like. She should be totally pale and skeletal, where you can see her skull through her face. And that would actually be a version of Little Mermaid that I would watch.
Also, from a scientific perspective, crabs can't sing.
Wrong.
Yeah. Crabs can't sing. Also from a scientific perspective, there are no fucking mermaids. I mean, maybe that was an attempt at deadpan humor there. But look, look, I want to put this up on the screen here. Sorry, Virtuoso. I don't mean to veto you, but that wasn't the comment I was going for. Sorry. I didn't mean to. Not that your comment's bad, but Gina says, I love when white people say colorblind when referring to race. Yeah, look, I think that is a decent point because, look, okay, Hans Christian Andersen was Danish. Denmark is obviously a majority white country, although there are some black people living in Denmark, obviously. But The Little Mermaid is not a story about Denmark. It's a Danish folktale in the sense that the author was Danish, but it doesn't speak to the Danish experience. It's a fairy tale. It's a myth, and so the idea that like Ariel has to be white because the author of this folktale, which was written almost 200 years ago now, lived in Denmark. That seems kind of ridiculous, and it seems to be. He talks about this sort of like double standard where you can do colorblind casting. I think that's all good. Like, there are parts that we just sort of assume are white if they're colorblind.
The idea that you can't have a black Little Mermaid, that's not really his argument. As far as some people will argue that was really not his argument. What he was saying at the beginning of the clip. That's his argument, that if it's going to be colorblind, it should all be colorblind. That's what he's actually arguing.
But like a white Medea would be...
As the translucent fish thing, that's a joke. This is the side of this that's interesting to me. he made a very much more complex argument over the course of 2 videos that the left didn't touch. He made a joke, which was clearly a joke, and it hit their sweet spot because by pretending that that was a serious comment, they get to do the we're so intellectually superior, we have so much more education, where does he not understand the science of fish? They get to do that. Whereas to actually take on the argument, which you can take on the actual argument he made. That's not the sweet spot. That's work. This is low-hanging fruit for libs. That's why the media was all over this.
Yeah, but what I would say is, I mean, even to that first point, I mean, it's not like casting a black person as Ariel is not the same as casting a white man as Medea, the Tyler Perry character, because those shows are about the black culture. Experience. It's about the black family. It's about black culture. Whereas the fucking Little Mermaid is not, and to the extent that it was 200 years ago when it was written, which I'm not a literary scholar, so I couldn't tell you, it's certainly not now. It's a Disney cartoon. It's popular entertainment now, and so it's not the same thing to cast a black Little Mermaid as it is to cast a white guy as Medea, or to remake whatever Encanto, the Mexican Disney film, or Puerto Rico. I don't even know what it was. I'm risking getting canceled by calling it Mexican because I don't know. A Latinx musical seems Mexican to me, even though Lin-Manuel Miranda's Puerto Rican. So I don't know. I don't know what was going on there. There was some cultural appropriation going on there. It sounds like. What's a Puerto Rican guy doing writing a Mexican folktale? If I'm right about that. If I'm not, I guess the channel's canceled. I don't know.
This is where the stuff gets complicated. Gina here is pointing out that mermaids originate in the Mediterranean, and you've had legends of mermaids, I believe, even in parts of Africa. So the idea of mermaids is not particularly Danish. It certainly didn't originate there. The myth of mermaids. Where this argument starts to get more complicated, we were talking about this a little offline. You have the Tolkien people who, the foremost African American critique of a diverse Lord of the Rings comes from a guy with a channel called Just Some Guy, and he is a Tolkien fanatic. If you have ever tried to read the Silmarillion, you will appreciate how much of a fanatic this guy is, because according to him, and I have no reason to doubt it based on his videos, he reads it again once a year. The fucking Silmarillion. Okay, that is like dry as a desert. That's like reading those history books that were really not written for a mass market, like predates that, where it's just, and King Robert did have a son, and in 1214 they planted trees. Like the Silmarillion is like that, only with mythology. That's a hard slog. He argues that you should not diversify Lord of the Rings because Tolkien's intention was to create a British folklore that might have existed if they had not been invaded by the Vikings. He went and looked at this old folklore that predated the Vikings and tried to expand on it in the way that he thought it might have evolved. So the argument is, clearly this is inherently British folklore. So why are you going to do that? Why not just develop African folklore? If you want, you wouldn't put a white person in that. That's a more grounded version of this argument, which again, you can disagree with. I mean, there's definitely, coming out of theater has been having this argument for longer than film and TV. This is a pretty recent conversation in film and TV. Being a theater guy, I'm sure you know, Keaton, it was really Joseph Papp who broke the color line in casting Shakespeare and started saying, hey, why don't we just cast whoever? Like, why do these characters need to be white? And what, as a theater person, I will say, you know what? Over time, my experience as a director and as a theater goer, people will accept any convention if you commit to it and it's consistent. If you want to use blue cloth to represent water, that's okay. You just have to do it every time you want to represent water. You can't then go hyper realistic in the next scene. You just have to be consistent. At this point, because of the precedent that Pap started, blind casting is the norm for classical. It's the norm for anything from Sophocles to Shakespeare. Any of that is blind casting. Doing it with things like Death of a Salesman, it's more controversial, but it's certainly done. There are certain things that's obviously inappropriate with, like Fences. You would not cast in a diverse way, Matt Walsh's opinion notwithstanding. It's, for me, coming out of a theater background.
White fences would be called gates. Wouldn't be called fences. Call it gates.
As a theater person, this is almost like I'm watching TV and film have a conversation that theater had 60 years ago. That's how it's striking me, that they're just getting around to this idea that, maybe people's imaginations are broad enough that you don't have to cast a mermaid white.
Well, yeah, right. And it's also about the audience. It's about the open-mindedness of the audience, not just in terms of like politics and what their racial attitudes are, but open-mindedness in terms of like how willing they are to be offered an experience by an artist, by a team of artists, right? Okay, we are going to present to you this piece of work. It's here for you to either like or dislike. We hope you like it, but if not, you can fuck off. That's an artist's attitude. But that's not how movies are made anymore, right? I mean, movies are catered to audiences now. Like, I feel like Paramount and Fox and Universal, these may as well be like restaurant brands now. They cater the product to what they think the audience wants. If the audience wants it mild and not spicy, they'll leave the pepper out, right? If the audience wants it a little sweeter, they'll put a dab of honey. And that's how they prepare these movies now. You hardly ever see a movie that just is so bold and confident and just puts itself out there and expresses itself in such a way that the audience could either take or leave. And those are the really great movies. Those are the pieces of art that resonate most strongly with people. Like Get Out, a perfect example of turning woke ideology on its head, turning your expectations completely inside out. The brilliant thing about that movie is that the first half hour is designed to trick you into thinking it's a shallow, libby, woke bullshit movie. Like when they hit the deer and the cop comes and the cop asks her black boyfriend for his ID, she sticks up for him. She's like, you don't have to show him your ID. And we think, okay, great, this is the white girlfriend being, whatever, very PC and very white saviory, standing up for her black boyfriend. Okay, yawn, seen this a million times before. By the end of the movie, we realize that, no, the reason she stood up for him is so the cop didn't see his ID because she was about to kidnap him and cut half his brain out. And they didn't want to know who went missing. And so it played with your expectations. It gave you something that you didn't know you were getting and just put itself out there for you to either love or hate. And most people loved it. And I feel like movies aren't made like that anymore. That's not how the system works anymore. 99% of movies now are just tailored to audience expectation. And so when you make a choice that is like supposedly this edgy choice, having a black Little Mermaid, that pisses off a lot of people who say, I'm sorry, waiter, I ordered my Little Mermaid white. Right? Because that's the attitude of the audience. That's the attitude of the audience. The audience is an entitled restaurant goer who feels like they are owed a product that they can expect and that they can digest easily and shit out and forget about, just like when you go to a restaurant.
All right. I'm actually going to disagree with you here a little bit. A lot of this debate is really focused on Disney right now. Somebody here mentioned the Fandom Menace. It's a YouTube, a group of Hollywood haters. All right. A lot of the backlash that you're getting to Disney is precisely that they are not catering to the fan base of a lot of their products. We're at a very weird moment here.
Well, but that's what I mean.
You have to remember.
But that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's my point.
Oh,
the point is that they're not. No, the point is
to them.
Well, no,
Okay,
because they're so used to being catered to that they expect to be catered to. So when a studio makes a choice like this, it's seen as this big affront to the tastes of their audience.
Well, it's very yes, and it's. I will be very interested from a business and a sociological perspective how all of this goes, because what they've done with the fantasy genre, and the comic books and the superheroes, because the point of view that they're taking, instead of trying to diversify, instead of trying to integrate more diverse characters in, because they've almost taken a tone of hating the fans, of almost intentionally antagonizing the traditional fans of these properties. The question is, well, do women and people of color want to watch superhero movies to the extent that the traditional lonely white male audience did?
Wants to do it,
like, are you gonna draw in as many of that audience? Because the numbers for Ms. Marvel suggest no, you can't really replace that fan base with the fan base that you want, because you have to remember, they've shown internal meetings that leaked. Who do you think the people who run Disney are? They're Ivy League graduates who have been, reared on wokeness. Like, this is ideological for them. It's not really marketing. They're trying to be able to push woke messaging in a very, I feel, self-defeating and obnoxious way. I feel you could bring all these people in, and that's the best way to go about it. But they want to antagonize the original fan base because for them, they don't like those people. They don't really, I mean, it's very clear from the way they write a lot of this stuff that they have nothing but contempt for the original fans of these properties. In the end, is that sustainable? I don't think so as a business. I mean, maybe Disney has so much money coming in from so many sources, they can get away with it if they're that committed to it. But I think there's only so many like Thor, Love and Thunder box offices they can get before they go in another direction. Maybe I'm wrong, but their numbers have been steadily dropping with that shift in gear from Avengers Endgame into Phase 4. And a lot of the Star Wars stuff too. I mean, we talked about this on the She-Hulk video. I think the big problem is they got a lot of shitty writers, and they deflect from that onto upset fans. And a lot of what they're complaining about, they're not wrong. The more, I'm not talking about the basement dwelling incels, but the ones who have a point here. I mean, there's definitely those. We got it on the She-Hulk video. We got some comments from people who clearly were woman haters. Not the majority, but we got a couple who clearly had issues with women and didn't. I'm sorry. What's getting you there?
No, who clearly had it. I was just thinking of the people.
Oh, did you read some of those?
I read a couple of them, but to me, it's just funny.
There were it's psychos. When you get into that
funny
stuff, like you draw some psychos out.
People who post that kind of shit on YouTube chat threads are funny. Yeah. It's funny because you have to think, what are they doing? What are they doing that they have time and the desire to do that?
All right. So for the engagement, I went back and forth with a couple of them. And you're right. Like, what the, I had a guy very vociferously arguing with me that no woman could do this. And I said, and that's never my argument, because action.
No woman can do what? Turn into a green.
Pray. His issue was a woman couldn't do that. And I said, okay, well, so do you have an issue with John Wick? Because any human would be dead in 3 seconds in any scene in a John Wick movie. He said, a man could get close to John Wick. This fucking guy falls off buildings,
Yeah,
like,
right.
hits the fire escape in a way that would shatter your spine in 5 places, hits the
I didn't
ground
see
and
that.
gets back up to fight more.
I don't think I saw that comment saying a woman could never do what the prey heroine could do.
Yeah,
That's
and
funny.
my
I would have said she could do it to you.
Yeah.
I'm sure they could do it to you.
My response to that.
They may not be able to do it to an alien predator.
Action movies have been male power fantasies forever. Like, what's wrong with it being a woman power fantasy? I mean, it's all unrealistic. Like, that's not really a standard to judge this by. It's a question of, is it a story well told or not? And that's where I think the whole Marvel Disney thing is falling apart, because it's no longer a story well told. They've gotten very lazy and very ideological, and they've lost the thread of storytelling. Most people do not watch a movie to be lectured to. Look at Maverick. You know, some people are trying to say the Disney movies are underperforming because post-COVID people aren't going to the movies. They went to Maverick, right?
Yeah,
there was a movie
absolutely.
that did not lecture to them.
All right, I'm going to showcase some comments here because we had some good engagement on this segment. I'm going to put Virtuoso's comment up because it's a good point, and I gypped you the first time, Virtuoso. I apologize about that. Shakespeare gave female roles to men. That is true. He did.
Well, because back then the women weren't allowed to act.
Yeah, they weren't on the stage. Right, exactly. It was all men. American Wasp with Dieter McBusiness. I'm assuming that's a YouTube channel of its own, so you got your little plug in here, man. Head over and subscribe to American Wasp with Dieter McBusiness. And like this stream, by the way, everybody, and please subscribe to our channel if you're not already. Writers basically say F you to the audience and just do what they want, but studio execs are propping up creators that force wokeism into stories.
Oh, shit. Gina's an aerospace engineer?
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah, I heard that Gina was an aerospace engineer.
What are you doing in here, Gina? We're losers, man.
We're idiots.
You're a winner.
Yeah.
You're a winner in the global economy.
No winners allowed. I should put a banner up.
Yeah. You go do your fucking rocket science or whatever it is you do.
Exactly. She put up, I just hate remakes in general. So many good books to make into movies. Just shitty writers trying to make some old shit woke and it doesn't work. I feel the same way. That's why I'm so disinterested in a lot of movies. You know, it's all remakes. It's all just regurgitate. Like, I remember when Christopher Nolan did Batman, he made his first Batman, the Batman Begins, I think it was 2005 or something like that. You know, there had not been a Batman movie out in about 8 years, because the Batman and Robin, the really horrible George Clooney one, I think that was 97.
The one that infamously put nipples on Batman's costume.
Yeah, I mean, just absolutely.
That's what that movie is
horrible.
most remembered for, I think.
Yeah, no, it was almost unwatchable. I mean, I was a 10-year-old kid who loved Batman when I went to see that, and I was so excited, and I hated it as a 10-year-old. So I could imagine what the average moviegoer thought of that film. But there had been 8 years without a Batman movie.
It was a gay Fantasia.
Yeah. I mean, I could see that. But there had been.
Hang on, I'm gonna do a big digression because it's just a fun fact.
Right,
so I don't think they have them anymore. But you used to have the Comics Code Authority seal on comic books. Every comic book had to get the approval of the Comics Code Authority. That was partly the fault of Batman and Robin. So in the 50s, there was a moral panic about comic books causing juvenile delinquency. And this was because a psychiatrist had made a classic correlation, not causation mistake. He saw the juvenile delinquents in reform school tended to read comic books, so he decided the comic books were causing the juvenile delinquency. So they did a big Senate subcommittee hearing, and they dragged in all these comic book creators, and they particularly were upset about Batman and Robin because they felt the homoerotic overtones were so blatant that it was going to turn children gay. That is why Batman went from being the Dark Knight to being a campy character who told you to eat your vegetables for about 30 years until Frank Miller reinvented him again. So just a fun little
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I didn't know that. We're getting a lot of good feedback on this segment. Maybe we should do more movie stuff, more movie and theater stuff. We could do a theater.
That's what
show.
I keep saying.
We could talk about plays. We could do all kinds of shit. I would love to do a theater.
Well, nobody sees theater. We should stick to film and TV.
I know, yeah, that's true. But theater is so niche. It's who knows? Might find some audience. But anyway,
Rupert here agrees with the 1950s era Senate subcommittee. Batman was a groomer.
Oh, American Wasp gave us $2, $1.99 for the plug. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'll check out your channel. I had not heard of your channel before, so I'll be sure to check that out, and I'll throw you a sub myself as soon as we're off the air here. But thank you, my friend. Yeah, but no, I mean, my main point for there was just like between 1997 and 2005, there was no Batman movie on the big screen.
Yeah,
and you know. For my money, I mean, maybe it was just because I was in my late teens and early 20s. That was when I had time to be a cinephile. You're right. You know what I mean? Maybe it's that. But those movies, that to me was a real golden age of movies. I mean, the 90s in general had a lot of great stuff. 1994, widely considered one of the greatest years in movies ever. Pulp Fiction, Shawshank Redemption, a bunch of other great ones came out that year. 91 was another great one. But those 2000s were huge. And one of the reasons they were huge, Matt Damon actually gave an interview on this, and the way he put it made really great sense, is that in the 2000s, you could have all these sort of mid-budget movies, whereas now you either have movies that are made on a shoestring or like the big Marvel movies, the big $300 movies that have to make $1 billion overseas, right? Whatever.
Right.
And he's like, back then you could make a movie for $40 million. Like a lot of the great movies of the aughts were, mid-budget movies. And he said you can make a movie in that mid-budget range because DVDs were still around, and so you didn't have to make all your money back at the box office. You didn't have to cover your nut at the theater. If you made half of your money back at the theater, you'd cover the other half when it came out on DVD, and then probably add some when it goes to HBO and all the shit like that. He says now you don't have DVD revenue, so now the movies have to make all their money at a theater. And with ticket prices being what they are now, you're probably not going to pay, the average moviegoer is not going to pay $19 to watch some quiet little family drama. If they're going to pay $19 to go into a dark room and watch a movie on a big screen, it's going to be The Avengers. It's going to be Jurassic Park. Sure. It's going to be Batman.
Well,
you know what I mean?
Well, also, I mean, that was coming out of, in the 90s, indie film really exploded.
That interview was on the Hot Wings show, as Gina said. Yes, that was Matt Damon gave that interview while eating spicy chicken wings. Yes.
Nice. Yeah, there was this there had never been anything like this before. Gen X was very into this DIY aesthetic. So you could make money with really low production values like Clerks and have it be a big hit. You could never put that in a movie theater now. It would pop up on some cable channel. It would be
or streaming, whatever.
It would be on Prime or something.
Right.
And nobody would see it, really. To have something like Clerks, Blair Witch, Breaking the Waves, the Brothers McMullen, like all of these quirky indies that were made for no budget by independent filmmakers, that really exploded in the 90s because it was a matter of aesthetics, technology, and a generational sensibility all coming together at exactly the right time. It was cheaper to make movies. Gen X would put up with shitty production values for a quirky story. But yeah, like now, it's not that artistic impulse disappeared. It, weirdly enough, all got channeled into TV. It all got channeled into streaming.
Right, exactly.
Cable. And today, Euphoria would be an indie. It wouldn't be an HBO series.
Right. It would be a movie. Right. Exactly. Alrighty. Well, we actually, a good friend of mine is a filmmaker who just had a film that has been 15 years in the making, starting with a short that I actually directed back in 2007. He just made it into a feature, and it was just admitted into the Woodstock Film Festival, which is coming up at the end of the month. And so we are going to interview him. I reached out to him. All right, cool. We'll interview him at some point over the weekend. Russell, I got to put a time together with him and you, but that'll be coming up. So yeah, like I said, I'd like to do some more indie film stuff on the channel. I think that would be fun. Requiem for a
And
Dream,
yes,
Virtuoso. Yeah, it's a
yes.
great movie.
Requiem for a Dream, and a lot of people feel this way. It's the greatest movie I've ever seen that I never want to see again.
Yeah, I mean that's a tough watch. That's a really brutal watch, and the ending is so bleak. It's like there's
my
no,
God.
there's no redemption. There's no glimmer of hope at the end. It's
I believe
crazy.
it's literally one of the greatest films I've ever seen, but it's just so hard to take.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt about it. All right, speaking of hard to take, let's do the Young Turks. All right. Yeah, exactly. So we want to talk a little bit.
That's an indie film that should never have been made.
What's that?
The Young Turks.
Oh, the Young Turks, right? Exactly. Yeah. All right. So TYT has been sort of battling with some of their detractors online and even some of their fans because in the past couple of weeks, they have sort of taken what many feel is sort of a surprisingly quote-unquote tough on crime stance. And Russell, you queued up some video. So do you know what time code I should plant this on? We're just going to give you a little bit of
I cut it for you.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So this started a couple weeks ago when Ana Kasparian made the following video here. So let's take a look.
Up for criminal justice reform, I thought we were going to do things like reform our prisons. So they're actually, rehabilitating people. I thought we were going to do something about policing. I thought we were going to end qualified immunity. So cops can't get away with shooting down unarmed individuals as they're running away from them. We didn't do that. I thought that we were going to provide funding for actual robust programs that would help nonviolent offenders transition back into society so they live full, happy lives. Didn't do that either. Instead, we're playing this game where we just, by the way, I also never thought that anyone was advocating for the early release of violent criminals, including individuals who have literally been in prison for murdering others. But it turns out California's all about it, and I ain't. I think it's a terrible, terrible way to go about this. This ain't reform. It's all about playing patty cakes with people who are not in any way rehabilitated, who have committed incredibly violent crimes, and in some cases, robbed others of their lives.
Okay, so that sort of started a whole back and forth.
Well, that's the most recent one. She's been on the crime beat for about 6 months. That's the fourth video like that she's dropped.
Okay, so because I remember she put out one where there was a guy who had been arrested and let go over 40 times, who then knocked an Asian woman out in the street.
An old Chinese woman in the,
right.
in the
yeah,
films. Yeah,
absolutely. And so, that started a bit of a sort of back and forth between, like I said, some TYT fans, some TYT detractors online. So this has been going on for quite some time. And then recently, just a couple of days ago, Cenk sort of injected himself into this by putting out some stuff on his Twitter page. So we'll take a look at this here. This is what really started it all. Will people who came up with defund the police slogan admit they were wrong? It was wildly counterproductive framing. You don't speak for the left, and neither do people pushing the counterproductive, quote-unquote, abolish prisons. Polls show that almost no one on the left agrees with you. He says, you can't claim to speak for the left if polls indicate that actual human beings who are on the left don't like your ideas. And if they like your ideas, but you bungled it by making your ideas sound worse through the names and framing, then that's on you. Do better. He goes on to have back and forths with people over their sort of abolish prison stances, takes on these sort of prison abolitionists, where the prison abolitionists propose we put serious violent criminals. If you're going to do something as extreme as abolishing prisons, which you're not because not one voter agrees with you, surely you have an alternative where they're not allowed to roam the streets, right? Then he talks about, how he wants to do prison reform, blah, blah, blah. all that stuff, right? He even put out one tweet that said, I can't find it now. Maybe he deleted it, or maybe the original source tweet got deleted. But he put something out about how, if you don't actually mean abolish prisons, then you shouldn't call it abolish prisons. You suck at naming things. And I just thought it was funny that guy who calls his channel The Young Turks says that you suck at naming things. I mean, is it safe to assume that you support the Armenian, genocide because you call yourself the Young Turks? I mean, you call yourself the Young Turks.
That's why he keeps Ana so close.
What's that?
Well, that's why he keeps Ana so close.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But he also did you get that in the wake of the George Floyd killing? He jumped right on the bandwagon.
Oh yeah, I have that.
He said he was fully for abolishing the police.
Yeah, I have that. I'll actually put that up right now. So somebody made a good point. Actually, several people made a good point to bring up an old tweet of his and made a little meme out of it. After George Floyd was murdered, he says, "I'm done. I'm now supporting defund the police 100%. I already largely agreed with the substance of the argument, and now I'm down for the framing too. There is no reform or transformation that can fix this. We have to start over and completely rebuild policing in this country." Cut to defund the police becomes an electoral liability for the Democratic Party, which I knew it would be as soon as I heard it. And now, will you admit that you were wrong? Will you admit that you were wrong and that it was wildly counterproductive framing? Here's the issue that I have with this, because Russell has made the point over and over again. I'm going to toss to you in a second so you can make it one more time for people who just found this channel. That if you pull back the power of the cops before you fix the underlying issues that cause crime, which is mainly poverty, desperation, isolation, alienation, then you're going to have an explosion in crime, and you're going to have a reactionary right-wing backlash to that. I take all that, right? Which is why I knew that defund was going to be an electoral liability for Democrats come November of any given year, because of course the GOP is going to hammer you on that. That's a given. What I have an issue here with is Cenk coming out and saying, will you admit that you're wrong? Because what does he actually mean by wrong? Do you mean that the phrasing and the messaging is wrong, or do you mean that the substance is wrong? Because in the wake of George Floyd's murder, you seem to think that both things were right. So now one of these two things is wrong. So what I would ask Cenk, and I would ask a CNN anchor this or an MSNBC anchor this, is, okay, let's say you feel that the defund the police framing is wrong, right? Let's say it's a bad slogan. It empowers the right wing because it enables the GOP to come after you and right-wing media to come after you, right? Okay, let's just give you that point. And I wouldn't necessarily give you that point in all senses, but I'll give you that point for the purposes of this little thought experiment here. I would then ask, okay, well, here's what defund actually means. It's very, very simple to explain what that means. It means take some money out of bloated cop budgets and reinvest those savings into social programs and, that improve people's lives to the point where intervention by the cops becomes less necessary and therefore less common, and so we can then defund, all these different, NYPD $5.5 billion budget, right? What do you need that for? That's what it means. It means we're going to take money out of police budgets and reinvest it into social programs. That's all defund the police means. So now that you know that that's what it means, whether you like the slogan or not, do you agree with the substance of it? Yes or no? And this is where you are going to, I guarantee, meet a ton of resistance, because the establishment media and the establishment Democrats, their answer is no, we do not agree with that, because they want more cops. They want more cops so they can continue gentrifying these cities, making boatloads of money, and sort of keeping the problems that come with gentrification, income, and disparities in these cities, excuse me, just keep those problems out of sight, out of mind. Excuse me. And that's what their actual agenda is. That's what they want. They don't want to defund the cops. They don't want less cops on the street. They want more cops on the street. It is not a policy goal to get to a point where you even could defund the police, right? Mm-hmm. And so at that point, what difference does the messaging really make? Because if they are going to give you resistance when you actually explain to them what the underlying substance of this slogan actually is, then what difference does it make what slogan you actually use? Is there a problem with the slogan, or is it with the substance? And once they say, no, actually, we disagree that we need fewer cops, we think we need more cops. The Democratic Party now is running on more cops. Pat Ryan, who's running in New York's 18th district, my district, which is a swing district now, he's sending out brochures talking about how much support he has for funding the cops. Val Demings, running for Senate in Florida against Marco Rubio. She's calling herself the chief, running on her police background. They want more cops. They like cops. They're pro-cop. The establishment media and establishment Democrats are all pro-cop. So this is not just a matter of framing or messaging. It is a question of substance. And so that's the first question that Cenk Uygur would have to answer. If you think the defund people are wrong, explain how. Are they wrong, in terms of messaging or substance? Now, he would probably tell you at this point that it's just the messaging that's wrong, but maybe he wouldn't. Who knows? If he says,
well, no, abolishing prisons, clearly.
Well, that's a different point, which we can get to in a moment. But if he says, okay, no, I don't think we ought to slash police budgets at all, then you have a substantive disagreement where you could say, okay, so you don't think that the NYPD's budget of $5.5 billion, $5.5 billion a year is the 2023 NYPD budget. You don't think we can slash that by 5% and free up $250 million to put to good use somewhere else so that people's lives are helped before the police need to intervene? Is that crazy? Because Democrats seem to think that's crazy. Val Demings goes on TV, we can't defund the police. That's crazy. Don Lemon, it's dumb. It's stupid. So if you want to have that argument, we can have that argument. But it seems like they're just hiding behind the excuse that, well, this is helping the right wing. This is helping Republicans get elected because there's a backlash. I'll make one last point and then I will toss to you. If you advocated for gay marriage in 2004, Cenk Uygur would say the exact same thing to you. You're wrong. You're stupid. The country is not with you. In 2004, for all the Gen Zers who may not know, the Republicans made family values, not the Iraq War, which they started illegally, family values, the centerpiece of that campaign. In Ohio, they put gay marriage on the ballot as a referendum in order to boost evangelical turnout and throw that state to George W. Bush because they knew Ohio was going to be the pivotal swing state that year. Pardon me. And they were right. It was. Okay? So if you were an advocate for gay marriage, if you believed, very rightfully, that 2 men and 2 women have the same right to be married as a man and a woman, and you were to express support for gay marriage full-throatedly, unapologetically in 2004, there's no doubt, the polls all bore this out at the time, that you would have been actively aiding and abetting the re-election of George W. Bush, by far the most destructive president in the history of this country. So to advocate for gay marriage in 2004 was to risk major short-term blowback by re-electing George W. Bush. That's just a fact. Does that mean you were wrong to do it? Does that mean you were wrong to do it? According to what Cenk Uygur tweeted out here, yes, you were. Yes, you were. According to me, no, you weren't. Because sometimes, we need people to be out in front of public sentiment, out in front of the polling. Just because something is polling underwater doesn't mean you have no right to advocate for it. In fact, that's how you win these battles. If you didn't have a gay rights movement in 2004, you wouldn't have won gay marriage in whatever it was, 2013, 2014, when the court ruled that way. You wouldn't have won that fight without the people going out and pushing for this idea before it was popular. But according to the, Katzenberg-funded Young Turks, no. The public's not with you yet. The public's not there. So shut up about it, because you're going to fuck things up for the Democratic Party, which has an election to win in 6 weeks. And that's their real concern. And I don't think progressive media should be water carrying for the Democratic Party in that way. If they want to have a strategic conversation about framing and messaging, that's one thing. Going online and browbeating people saying, well, you admit that you were wrong all along, even though I told you I agreed with you just 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. That's just bullshit.
He embraced it when it was convenient. When he would have been if in the wake of the George Floyd killing, he hadn't taken that position, they would have lost 1 million subscribers. He had to jump out in front of that parade. The emotion. But
that was also when the public was
such.
angry. They were angry and they were upset, and they didn't care if it cost Joe Biden votes. That wasn't the point. The point is, we just watched a guy get choked under a cop's knee for 9 minutes.
Right.
And we've had enough of this. This is the right thing to be advocating for. If the Democrats don't get enough votes because of it, so be it. That's their problem, not ours. That's the attitude that I think any left movement must take. And, if you are carving out a space for yourself as a voice of independent left media, then I don't think you should be browbeating that activist base in that way.
Okay, so Ana, and let me just be clear. I always feel that I have to be fair because I'm such a nasty, vicious bastard when I lay into somebody. I feel I need to be fair about how I deploy that. I have no love for that fat fuck and his crafty minion. But Ana has advocated for prison reform for a long time. Like, she has not changed her position, and she's been pretty clear on what she means. I'm not quite clear what reforms he supports, probably similar to her, though. I think they do actually ideologically support the underlying premises of defund the police, of diverting resources. I mean, some people really do straight out just mean take the money out of the police department. But cooler heads mean divert some of that money to social services, to housing, to support community services, rather than to the police. Now, that I do personally support, because theoretically, it does not lead to an explosion in crime. The reason that the left always loses this argument, and when we were talking about this back when it first came up, I was pointing out, look, taking this approach of defunding police departments, although back then it really wasn't ideological. It was because, back in the 70s, it was because the cities lost their tax bases to white flight and deindustrialization. They literally did not have enough money to hire enough cops or enough firefighters and so on. But in the end, the left always loses the anti-cop argument because fear is a lot more powerful than hope, love, optimism,
empathy,
compassion, empathy. Once people get scared, that's it. You lost the argument. I was just in New Orleans, and they're having a serious problem because and police departments around the country are having this problem, some more than others. They're having it particularly severely. Part of the Great Resignation is cops and teachers quitting. Like, what the fuck am I going to risk my life for this amount of money? And this is something that the anti-police forces, or people who are rabidly anti-police, don't take into consideration. Whenever I see somebody who paints all cops as murderers and just, basically Klansmen with badges, okay, I want to see you not call the cops when you get attacked. Tell me you're not going to call the cops for ideological reasons. Somebody's breaking into your house. You're going to call the cops? I bet you're going to call the cops. I've had good experiences with police where they really helped me out. And I've been beaten up by police. So I'm not naive about what police are prone to or capable of. But I think it's also naive to think all cops are these ravening racist monsters. And the idea that you don't need them is foolish. We have created a civilization in which many people are brutalized, alienated, and given very little reason to adhere to the codes of society that the voters who wind up voting in these law and order politicians can afford to adhere to, because they live in much more comfortable circumstances. But this is what I mean when I say you have got to address that before you start scaling back on police. Because when you scale back on police without addressing that, you empower the right wing. Because inevitably, and look, I was saying this back during George Floyd. Remember I said you're going to have an explosion in crime because of this. And then you're going to get this reactionary backlash. I said this 2 fucking years ago. And now we're here. Because you didn't have to be a genius to figure that out. I mean, it's just common sense. Less cops, don't address the underlying causes of crime. Boom. Explosion in crime. People get scared. And now you've got, instead of defunding the police, you got Biden up there trying to get more money for the police. That's how that's going to end up. Look, I was on Bourbon Street talking to, I've been to New Orleans 5 times before this, well, including this time. They're having such a problem hiring cops. This is the only time I've ever been there that there were no cops on Bourbon Street. And look, man, everybody's drunk and, you know, we had a lot of hustlers. I was sitting there with a guy, man, and somebody came up and threatened to punch him in the face. Unfortunately, he didn't actually do it. But look, man, we're not living in amongst a tribe of 60 people, which was how humans lived for hundreds of thousands of years, where everybody knew everybody out in the forest. This is a society where people are constantly interacting with strangers that they have no personal or emotional investment in, no personal connection to. Under those circumstances, you're going to get a lot of violence. You're going to get a lot of crime. I mean, it's partly symptomatic of civilization. I think it's just something you get with civilization. And the kind of civilization you have will determine how bad it is. And to take a bit of a turn, the Tao Te Ching was actually, it's become like a central work of Zen philosophy, but that was written as advice to the emperor on how to govern. And one of its central tenets is the way the emperor behaves will determine the behavior of the people. So if the emperor is greedy, the people will be greedy. If the emperor is a liar, the people will be liars. Now, if you take that out of emperor and just talk about government, society, policy, we have a society bound to create sociopaths. What is society telling you when it doesn't give you healthcare, when it doesn't give you education, when it particularly tells people who are from poor areas or from poor families that we're not going to give you the help you need to get out of this situation. We're going to let you just suffer. We're going to let everybody that you know live in this crushing poverty. And then you expect people to grow up and everyone's going to have normal levels of empathy and compassion. You're not going to get violence. This is what I'm saying. And honestly, it's hard to know how you would even solve that through democratic means. You're talking about parts of the country that have been abandoned. You have intergenerational poverty, intergenerational dysfunction. Yes, the police are like an army whose purpose is to repress the natural consequences of treating people that way. That is absolutely true. The injustice that people are seeing, it's not there. Is the solution that Asian woman gets punched in the face by the guy who
had been arrested 41 times. It's just not that simple that you can just get rid of bail and let everybody just run around free. When you try to do that, and like I said, in the 70s, it was partly liberal policy, but it was partly the cities going bankrupt. But the era that we're living in now is a direct consequence of the chaos of the 70s. That scared the shit out of people so badly that we've gotten 40 years of conservative governance under both Republicans and Democrats. It's still conservative governance post 1980, even when you have Democrats in power. That is largely because of the chaos of the 70s and what it did to people. Here in New York City, the specter of the 70s, Jesus Christ, if crime ticks up 3%, we're going back to the 70s. They never stop talking about it in New York. It is this trauma that is seared in the mind of this city. And it's something that every politician makes hay of when they're running for office.
Yeah, let me go to American Wasp, who upped his super chat amount to $9.99. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Not a cop hater, but let's be serious. The infallibility of the badge has gone way too far, and everyone needs to remember that 90% of a cop's job is wearing the uniform and filling out paperwork. I mean, I think 90% of the cop's job is protecting property and raising money for the state. I mean, that's basically what the cops are out there to do. And I do think that even now, I mean, I take your point, Russell. I think it's a good one. I thought it was a good one when you made it 2 years ago. You've made it plenty of times since, and I think it's a fair point. I think even now there are excesses in a lot of these police budgets that can be trimmed, and we can start investing some of that money into improving the lives of people such that hopefully...
But I don't disagree with that. I agree with diverting some resources so that you're not leaving a vacuum. I agree with taking a different approach. But
yeah,
you
but
have
every person who I've spoken
just
to
defund the police without putting anything in its place. That is what I do not agree with.
But I haven't met any defund the police activists who have told me that's what they want to do. They don't want to defund the police and just take that money out of the city budget altogether. Everybody I've spoken to has said, yeah, defund the police and use that money, put that money to good through various different, social programs. Like that just makes sense.
Yeah, but
see,
look,
to me, it's completely rational. It's completely pragmatic.
If you want people to show up to situations where somebody's mentally ill and raving on the street, and you don't feel that's a police matter, okay, all right, but you need to hire those social workers or community activists who you're going to call to go and deal with that.
Yeah,
there needs to be somebody you're paying somebody to deal with those situations.
But as I'm putting this comment back up on the screen, not just because he gave us money, but because I think it's relevant, 90% of a cop's job wearing the uniform and filling out paperwork. So I'm not even talking about a madman raving on the street. I'm talking about pulling people over for a broken taillight, right? What do we need armed agents of the state to do that for? What do we need armed agents of the state to pull you over because your taillight's out? Why don't you have traffic enforcers do that? Because it happens all the time. I interviewed, our local DSA chapter here in Newburgh does these things. They call them taillight workshops, where if you have a brake light or a taillight out, they will set up, once every few months, the local DSA here will have a team of guys who are out set up on, some street corner in some parking lot. And if you have a broken taillight, you can come and they will fix it for you, or they'll put a new one in. Because just look at the cycle that this sort of thing just perpetuates over and over again.
Sure.
You're driving down the street, you have a fucking busted taillight, a cop pulls you over, he checks you out, whatever, you got weed in the car, all right? Now you're cuffed, right? Now you're in jail. Now you have a record. Now you can't get a good job for the rest of your life. Now you can't leave your kids any inheritance. All because what? You had some weed in the car when a fucking cop pulled you over for a broken tail light.
Right.
What do you need the police for that for? Wouldn't we
Sure.
be better off if we had some sort of community traffic enforcement, an agent of the government? I'm not saying you just don't have any traffic laws anymore. But what if we had, an unarmed clerk, pull you over? Excuse me, sir. I'm going to write you a little fix-it ticket here. You have, 48 hours to get the taillight fixed. If not, you have to pay a fine. What do you need a guy with a gun who's going to sniff you out for, whatever, like if you have drugs in the car? What do you need to enable that situation? Why do you need to put people in that spot for? Like, those are the kinds of things. Those are the day-to-day functions that the police serve.
You're absolutely right. But this is something that the left just does not even talk about. When you create this much antipathy towards the police, who whatever their social role, are as a rule not out there to fuck people up. That's not my experience from knowing cops personally, from dealing with cops. In general, that's not their mission. That's not what they're getting up in the morning looking to fuck people up. I think most of them want to do some good. I think a lot of them get frustrated by the job and wind up becoming bad cops over time. I think there are some legitimately bad cops. I don't really think it's the majority. I mean, look, I'm in New York. I can't speak to every police force around the country. Let me make clear. I'm commenting on the NYPD. Specifically the NYPD. That's my experience from being from here. I mean, I've known a lot of people who became cops. They definitely develop a certain cynicism over time. I think that's probably common to any big city cop. I mean, you year after year, you're cleaning up this shit, and the next year it's just as bad, right? In some cases worse. It gives you a certain world weariness. But what we're getting from turning around and telling cops that we hate them, why do they want to get out of the fucking car now? That's what you're seeing in a lot of cities where the cops, they just don't even want to do the job anymore. They'll collect the paycheck, but they're like, fuck it. Everyone hates me. Why am I going to risk my life? What if I wind up having to pull my gun and shoot somebody? What? I'm going to be on the news as a racist? Why bother?
Well, look,
think about it. If you were a cop in this environment, would you want to stick your neck out in those kinds of situations, knowing that you could get branded, even if it's totally justified? You tackle somebody running out of a Walmart with an armful of shit, and you tackle them, and you're on the news that night as racist cop. Like, why bother? Let it go. Let them go.
This is why but this is another argument for making police departments smaller. Because if you make police departments smaller, you minimize the risks that these interactions will take place in the first place. Gina just posted on the comment thread, cops, they found, kids smoking weed in a car. They chased them down. They caused a car accident, right? Now the kids are running away from the cops. Now they are, whatever, resisting arrest, reckless endangerment, whatever. Now you got these kids with this world full of legal problems, all because there was a cop around them when they were token up.
That's not the cop's fault. That's really not. That is that is the system as a whole.
But what I'm saying,
our audience might not know. Listen, I was before I straightened my head out, I was a fucking delinquent, man. I got arrested a few times in my younger days. I got arrested breaking into a corporation building. I got, I never went to prison, but I spent some time in jail. And look, that's definitely a racial disparity. I have no doubt with the kind of shit I was pulling when I was a kid. If I had been black, I'd have a record. There's no doubt. They're much more hesitant to ruin the life of a white kid. But yes, there's all that. There's systemic racism in the system. I experienced it. I've seen it. I got treated much better as a white person in the system than any black person would. That's all true, but the cops are. It's like blaming the fighting dog that was trained that way.
No, but what I'm saying is,
it's what they're deployed to do within a broken system.
That's why there should be fewer of them. That's my point. I'm not saying you blame the individual cop for chasing a kid for smoking weed. If that's what they get paid to do, that's what they get paid to do, right? You can't hate the player, got to hate the game, right? Right. But if there were fewer of them, then those instances would be less common, and you would have cops that you can call if there's a violent situation. But what do you need them patrolling every corner, harassing some fucking kids for fucking token up? It doesn't make sense. There should just be fewer. And look, if there were fewer of them, and these interactions were less common, then people wouldn't hate cops so much, because there wouldn't be cops sniffing around every corner when you're with your buddies in a car and you're smoking a little fucking weed. There wouldn't be a cop on your ass the next minute, and now your life's ruined 5 minutes later. So if we would just chill the fuck out, find other ways to address these issues instead of having armed agents of the state follow you around with guns all the time, then people wouldn't hate cops as much. They would just there wouldn't be that animosity, because they wouldn't feel like they are patrolling the neighborhood looking for people breaking the law, looking for, ways to ruin the lives of nonviolent people who are maybe putting a substance in their body that the state deems illegal. I just have to get to this. This is very, very important, Russell. Sorry.
I saw that.
A $20 super chat from Mr. Rokia. A cab, but you two are great. Well, thank you very much. And Russell says,
weed, now we can buy some.
And now we can buy some, right? Exactly. Russell said, in his experience, most of the cops were not bastards. You say all cops are bastards. I would honestly, and I almost interjected this when he said it, I would seek out a middle ground. In my personal life experience, it's been half and half, honestly. So my hashtag would be HOCAB. Half of cops are bastards. That's what I'm on that page. If we can get that trending, I think that's very moderate and sensible. It's true. In my experience, half the cops I've dealt with have been fine. Half of them have been total assholes. It's not like this is a few bad apples thing. No, it's half of these people are fucking assholes in my experience.
Like I said, man.
And I'm sure if I were a different color, it would be a far greater percentage negative. Yeah.
Like I said, I'm commenting on the NYPD, and I've had more experience with the NYPD than most white boys who have been to college. I've been slapped by cops. Let me tell you something. As somebody who's been arrested multiple times, all that shit you see on TV with the Miranda warnings, I mean, unless there's like a TV camera there, that's a fucking joke. They don't do that. And if you say I didn't get read my Miranda warnings, they're just going to say, yes, we did. Who are they going to believe? So listen, man, I know. Like, I am much less naive. I know more about what goes on when cops arrest somebody than I would wager the vast majority of the people listening to this right now. That you don't have to tell me how cops behave. I get it. But do you want to demoralize big city police forces to the point that when they're breaking into your house, they don't want to come? They don't want to come. What the hell am I going to come for? And it seems like it's to that point in certain places. For example, in New Orleans, and this is horrible, and I hope it doesn't upset people. There was an incident in New Orleans about a month ago where, and I mention it because that is a place that is a perfect example of where you have an understaffed police force that has just given up on doing the job. A woman called in a rape. She was witnessing it, like in the French Quarter, not even in the French Quarter, and found a cop in his car, and the cop wouldn't get out of his car. And it took about 45 minutes before that cop never went to the scene. Other cops were called in about 45 minutes. By the time they went there, they were gone. Like, the woman was gone. The whole thing was over with. Now, we can't speak to that particular cop or why he didn't get out of his car. But you're seeing in a lot of cities situations where the police just don't even come anymore. And I think that is a natural consequence of not treating this as let's prosecute bad cops problem, but treating this as a all cops are bastard problem. If I'm a cop and society is telling me I'm a bastard, I'm doing the bare minimum.
look, I don't care that cops are bastards. I don't care how many cops are bastards. Like I said, in my experience, it's been around half, and your experience has been less than half. I'm sure there are a lot of black people who would say almost all the cops they've interacted with have been fucking bastards. I don't really care how many cops are bastards. I don't see this. It's like I don't see defunding as a sort of punitive measure against bad cops. If anything, I think it's a way.
I'm talking about another thing. I'm talking.
I understand, but what I'm saying is
the conversation.
But what I'm saying is, I'm saying that if we want people's attitudes towards cops to improve, because look, I grew up just outside of a very poor minority city. People in those neighborhoods are very suspicious of cops, but there are also a lot of people in those neighborhoods who need cops to show up when there is a violent incident in the neighborhood, right? So it's a very complex relationship. It's a double-edged sword. It's not a black or white thing. But what I'm saying is part of the reason why people hate cops so much, part of the reason why people are so suspicious of cops so much is because there are too many fucking cops around doing jobs that cops should not have to do. Therefore, the policy proposal to defund police departments and divert funds into more productive areas is completely rational. It's completely pragmatic. It's not radical. It's none of those things. It's common sense. And going back to the subject of the segment, if you're a progressive media host like Cenk Uygur, that's the page you should be on. If you got a problem with messaging or whatever, you can express that constructively. But the idea that in substance, defund is just wildly wrong and wildly radical and off base, that's bullshit. It makes perfect sense. If these PDs were smaller, they would be more popular. If there were fewer cops doing fewer things, people would like cops a lot more. They would like them a lot more because they wouldn't see them as an occupying force patrolling the nonviolent violations of the people. They would see them as people who are there to help when you're in trouble. That's what you need cops for. You don't need $5.5 billion worth of that in New York City. You don't. Even now, you don't.
No, you don't. Yes. Go artist. Yeah, I mean, certainly that cop belongs in the lowest ring of hell who did not respond to a fucking rape call. I don't care what the hell is going on with the rhetoric around policing. Somebody said the excuses I'm making for cops sound a lot like Joe Rogan's. I don't know what his comments about cops are, but tell me something. Somebody's breaking into your house tonight. Are you gonna not call the cops? Now, if the answer is yes, I respect that. If you're just gonna let whatever happens, you're consistent. If you are gonna call the cops, don't tell me about what Joe Rogan said about cops.
I mean, look, I don't like big pharma, but I take a blood pressure medicine. Like, I'm on an ACE inhibitor for fucking high blood pressure. Doesn't mean I love the institution that is supplying me that medicine. To me, they don't have anything to do with each other. You can have a critique of the cops and still need the cops from time to time. You know, just like you can have a critique of big pharma and still take a medication if you.
Yo, man, right? A cop walked up to me when I was 16, out of uniform, not even working. Me and my friend were coming out of an abandoned house. He literally walked up, slapped us both in the face, and then pulled out his badge. So what are you going to do? We were 16-year-old fucking kids. So all of this, I'm not coddling the cops. I'm not coddling them.
Oh, speaking of that, I wanted to read our private chat from Kevin. Kevin said, the Vanguard castigated TYT for their crime crap. Why are you coddling the Vanguard? He accused us of coddling the Vanguard. But as you can see, we're not really coddling the Vanguard. We have a little bit more of a nuanced take on this. Gina here puts up, the cops are there to protect Capitol. That's it. Yeah, that is 90% of their function. That's 90% of their function.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And that's why the political establishment and their media mouthpieces don't want any funds taken away from them. Because look, in a city like New York, and you know, Cenk and Ana live in Los Angeles, I'm sure there's a similar dynamic there. You have a lot of very rich, comfy, cushy neighborhoods in New York and LA. And if you're enjoying a life there as, a high income earner, then you kind of want to be shielded from, crime, harassment, homeless people on the street.
Sure.
You want to be shielded from
Well,
a lot of the
she did a
consequences
whole
of
thing
your
about
gentrification,
homelessness
right?
At the same time that Katzenberg was lobbying the LA City Council to pass an ordinance that you couldn't sleep on the street. She did a whole segment about the camping in Los Angeles at the same exact time that Katzenberg was pushing for that.
Right. And so, okay, great. So what is the quickest way to deal with that? What is the quickest, easiest, simplest way to get homeless people off the street, to get the bums to stop begging you for money? The simplest way to do that, if you want to just enjoy your life, in Soho and not have to deal with, homeless people begging you for money or harassing or whatever, the quickest way to deal with that is to just have a guy with a gun and a nightstick come and say, "You, sir, come with me now." And if he doesn't cooperate, you put him in handcuffs, you throw him in the back of a car, take him away, out of sight, out of mind. That's the simplest way to deal with it. And
Well,
that's
that's
the
what
way the
Giuliani
liberal
did.
class wants to deal with it. That is what they want. That is how they want to deal with it. They don't want to do the arduous work of investing in social services, paying a little bit more in taxes, doing rehab for people, getting people's lives together. No, they would rather shove them in the back of a cop car and have them taken out of sight so they can enjoy their, nice meal at the outdoor table, right? That's the way these people want to live. And the way they vote perfectly represents that, both in the
Well, and
Republican
this-
Party and the
and this-
Democratic Party, which is now running on an explicitly pro-cop platform when it comes to this issue. Right?
Well, and this is
it's
why
a race to the right
politically-
on this issue now.
Yes.
And
this
and
is why-
progressive media should not be partaking in that. Progressive media should be pushing back on that and saying, "Hey, we're going to be the 2004 gay marriage advocates and say this is the right thing to be pushing for." And whatever short-term electoral blowback there is the Democrats' problem, not ours. Because if you weren't willing to put yourself out there, not just in 2004, which is when gay marriage was on the ballot, but the gay rights movement goes back, obviously, we all know this, decades prior. Without that work being done, that very unpopular work that no doubt cost Democrats a lot of races, if that work was not done, you would not have gay marriage now. The Civil Rights Act came within a fucking ball hair of blowing up the Democratic Party forever. That almost just caused a permanent collapse of the Democratic Party. If not for some last-minute maneuvering at the 1964 DNC, the Democratic Party would have splintered into 1,000 pieces. Goldwater would have won because there would have been no party to run against him. If they took the nomination from LBJ over the Civil Rights Act, there'd have been no Democratic Party anymore. Right. You would have had Barry Goldwater, and whatever cycle of events that put in place, that's what would have happened. Does that mean the Civil Rights Act was not worth signing? Of course not. Of course not.
Sure. And I'm not saying you don't continue to advocate for, okay, first of all, yes, you drop the defund the police, at least if you're serious about trying to get anything done. You drop that label. You make it clear, because it is easier. Yes, you're right. These Democratic politicians in the end are always on the side of capital and their wealthy donors. So they don't really want to redistribute the way these resources are doled out. But you're making it real easy for them when you call it defund the police. It make them have to explain why they don't think some of this money should be diverted into community services or for psychiatric workers. Make them explain it. When you call it defund the police, you make it easy for them to say, "No, I'm not for that." They don't have to explain anything as long as you call it that. Secondly, I'm just going to say this is just a political reality. I understand what you're saying. That's not the concern of activists. Okay. You can't really compare these things to the Civil Rights Act. You can't compare it to gay marriage, because when you're talking about crime, you're talking about such visceral fear, A, and B, this is always the problem that these reformist movements run into in this area. The people who vote the most are the ones least likely to defund the police or redistribute the police or whatever framing you want to put on it. They are the people most likely to be afraid for their safety and their capital, and least likely to be brutalized by the system.
That I agree with. I think there was a lot of visceral fear of abolishing Jim Crow, right, in the early 60s South. I think visceral fear had a lot to do with opposition to the civil rights movement.
Absolutely, but it was a weird time. I think something that's not explored enough from that period is seeing the concentration camps in World War II had a pretty deep impact on that generation. There's a tendency to cast
the greatest generation
as unconcerned with civil rights, and that's really not true. There was a movie, a mainstream Hollywood movie released after World War II with Roddy McDowall called The Boy with Green Hair. That was all this racism allegory about how this boy with the green hair was ostracized and how wrong it was. There was a deep concern, not just when they did a poll in the 60s of the hippies and the counterculture, the polling found that they had the most in common ideologically with their parents rather than any other sector of society. So to paint that greatest generation as a roadblock rather than an impetus to the Civil Rights Act, well, clearly that doesn't hold up, or Johnson would not have been elected in 1964 if that were really the case. If the World War II generation did not feel that passing the Civil Rights Act was a moral duty to correct historic injustices in the country, then Goldwater would have been the president. If you look at polling from that period, most people were for it. The reason things swung to Nixon, and this kind of plays to my point, the reason things swung to Nixon ultimately later on, and the tough on crime, is they passed the Civil Rights Act, and it wasn't nearly enough to address hundreds of years of abuse and iniquity. So
right.
You get
it couldn't properly correct for all the racism leading up to that. Right.
No. So the cities explode. You get rioting. It was like as soon as you released the lid a little bit from this boiling pot, it exploded with hundreds of years of injustice and rage. But the white people, many of whom were these World War II vets or people who had been affected by the footage that came out of World War II, remember there was I think the left forgets this. I think it's not explored enough how much Americans had a moment after World War II where they were very, at least for those times, anti-racist because of the example of the Nazis, right? This is what they had just gone to Europe and fought against, right? So how do you come home and advocate for that? That was how the Civil Rights Act got passed, and that's why Johnson got elected. But when the city started burning down, a lot of these people said, well, what the hell did we do all this for if they're just going to riot and burn the city down? And that's when they retreated back to what today we would call white privilege. They had the privilege to disown that whole movement as soon as they didn't like the results. And that's what they did, and they turned to Nixon.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Book I would recommend for a lot of that backstory, book called Nixon Land. It's not actually about Nixon. It's about the country under Nixon.
Yeah, so we have some in the comments here. Defund is perfect. It's a good... I mean, this goes back to what we were saying about an hour ago, which means we'll wrap soon because we're going to start repeating ourselves, which is always an indication that it's coming close to wrap time. I think defund the police as a slogan does leave whoever's saying that vulnerable to Republican, backlash, voter backlash, come November of that cycle. But once again, what I started this segment out by saying is that ultimately I think this obsession over it being bad messaging and bad framing is somewhat hollow, because if you took 10 seconds and said, okay, here's what it means. It means less money for cops, more money for social services. Are you cool with that now that you know what it means? It just took me literally 5 seconds to explain to you what this slogan means. How do you feel about that? They would say, no, we don't like that. And if they say, no, we don't like that, it means they would attack whatever slogan you used for that, because they're not just attacking the slogan. They are attacking the underlying substance because they are opposed to the underlying substance. And so,
but at least then you're debating the underlying substance, and you're able to take the underlying substance to the public. But when you say defund the police, you give them such an easy out. They don't have to debate the substance.
I would grant you that it does make it a bit easier. But I only say a bit easier because I said, look, if you wanted to have an honest conversation about what you meant, it would only take 5 seconds to get to the substance. So I understand it creates an extra step. But also the other thing to understand about the defund the police is that this was not a focus grouped slogan that was researched and tested and poll tested and everything. This was an organic demand that sprung out of an activist movement at a moment of justifiable rage. And so sometimes you got to just go with it because that's what came out of the movement, right? And there are going to be lots of roadblocks in the way. And like I said, the debate about whether to front to sort of privilege that slogan, whether to run with that saying, that is, I think, a debate that people can have in good faith. You can have a constructive argument about that. What you can't do what is not constructive is what Cenk does here. Will people who came up with defund the police slogan admit they were wrong? It was wildly counterproductive. That's not constructive.
Well, no,
because all you're telling them, because what
speaking
that
for the left. Like he speaks for the left.
Like he speaks for the left. But it's also, it's what you're basically telling people there is shut up because you're going to cost Democrats votes. Mm-hmm. And this is what a lot of people are, constantly sort of concerned about, is that, like, is all of this activism being funneled into the Democratic Party, which is ultimately a graveyard, Shama Sawant, right? The road to progressive change inside the Democratic Party leads to a graveyard because ultimately, if you say something at the wrong time of year, right around when the leaves start to turn, late September, early October, that's going to get the Democrats in trouble in November, you have to shut your mouth. Because ultimately, it's more important for the Democrats to win. And this is why I think the gay marriage comparison does work. Not that it works in every single way, but it works in that way. To be on the correct side of that issue, to be on the morally correct side of that issue in 2004 was to cause the world real material harm. The re-election of George W. Bush cost this planet millions of lives. Millions of lives. And there is no doubt that to advocate for gay marriage in September, what's today? It's September 15th? So what am I talking about? 18 years ago today, to say no. John Kerry is a pussy. How dare he come out against gay marriage? How dare the Democratic Party be this weak on gay marriage? Because the Democratic Party, for all you Gen Zers who might not know this history, they were against gay marriage too. Mm-hmm. George Bush put it on the ballot. Karl Rove had it put on the ballot in Ohio.
Obama was against it until Biden preempted him.
Right. What happened
and then he had to come around because Joe jumped the fence.
Exactly. Joe was for it first. But what happened was, the GOP put gay marriage on the ballot in Ohio and ran a family values campaign against gay marriage. And John Kerry and John Edwards did not take the counterposition and said, no, of course gay people have the right to be married. They said, no, we agree. Marriage is between a man and the woman. And they took the moderate milquetoast stance of promoting civil unions, meaning we're for civil unions. We want legally recognized civil unions between homosexual couples, but we don't want to call it marriage because marriage is a sacred bond between a man and a woman. Completely immoral bullshit stance that they took. And if activists were in the streets then saying what these Black Lives Matter activists were saying just 2 years ago, right? If there were an activist movement saying, of course, gay marriage should be the law of the land. How dare you suggest otherwise? The Democratic Party, the mainstream media, and apparently this meathead would be telling you, no, you're wrong. No one agrees with you. Shut up. You're going to cost the Democrats votes in November. And look, they'd have been right in the short term. They would have had a point. Like, if getting rid of George Bush was the imperative, if that was the ultimate goal,
like I said,
they'd have had a point. You're hurting the odds. You're hurting the odds,
but
but that doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
Because look, gay marriage, some people who are not going to vote Democrat anyway might have been afraid of it. Democrats, I think for the most part, anyone who took exception to it were just people who were worried about political consequences, which, again, they needn't have, because the political consequences were mostly from people who are not going to vote for them anyway. This is different. This is something that scares people. We've had this on other topics where you very strongly have argued that it doesn't matter if you can't get power, that the left is very childish and not orienting itself around gaining power.
Sure.
So if you're going to present this issue in a way that almost guarantees that you're never going to get any power, what's the point?
Well, I don't know if it guarantees you're never going to get any power. I mean, I think it is a short-term liability in this cycle, in this sort of,
you would have to change so many structural things before you could push this through.
I take that point. Point.
This just won't work. This just won't work. That's really the bottom line. And forget about how you feel about cops. Don't feel about cops. Whatever, man. This won't work. You can scream defund the police until you're fucking blue in the face. You're not going to get anywhere. You can say, well, the times are going to change. No, not really, because gay marriage, it's, man, gay marriage is going to put a rock through your fucking window, man. Once the kind of people who vote get scared, they're going to vote for the first law and order politician who comes their way.
But does that mean then, look, I take those points. I said in the summer of 2020 that defund the police will be an electoral liability for the Democratic Party.
It will never not be.
I agree.
The way that you're framing it as being like gay marriage, it's not like gay marriage.
No, but the point is that, but what I would follow that up with is, does that mean you can't seek any kind of police reform until we create a utopian society? Can we not start diverting funds from all of these different police departments until we get Medicare for all, until we get, free pre-K, until we get a higher minimum wage, because it doesn't look like there's any movement on that either. That's the other thing. The same people who are hand-wringing and pearl-clutching about the defund the police don't seem very eager to do the other work of improving people's lives so that we don't need the cops as much, right? And so if you're saying, well, we can't have criminal justice reform until we reform society.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying get rid of the defund the police slogan.
You missed a good chance to do a hey, hey, hey there. You're asleep at the wheel. We've been on too long. Sleep at the board.
I know. Who expected this to go on so long? Well, yeah, I'm saying get rid of the framing, get rid of the and I agree with the objectives, because in theory, if you really did it that way, where the money is going into other programs and resources, you're not creating a vacuum. In theory, you should not get that kind of an uptick in crime. So I support that. Don't reduce the police budget. Take part of it and put it into community services, community policing, other means, de-escalation counselors, other people who can deal with these things in other ways. But you need to frame it and advocate for it in that way. Otherwise, you're just jerking off. You're never going to convince people defund the police. You're making it so easy for everyone who opposes your reform measures. So why get hung up on that? And the idea, well, if you just advocate for it in the most extreme way, eventually they'll come around like they did on gay marriage. No, they won't. It's a different issue. It's a very
Gina
different
says
issue.
is right. That is defunding it. And this is my point, is that I don't.
Yes, it's a semantic thing, Gina, but that's politics.
But again, my point is, if the explanation is so simple and they would, of course, object
Just
to the
call
substance
it, just
underlying
call it
it.
reform the police.
So if you called it reform the
put
police,
them in a position that they have to say, no, I'm not for reforming the police. You lost so much goodwill that was there in the wake of George Floyd. 80% of the public supported reforming the police. And then you had to go and scare the living shit out of them. I'm sorry. This is politics. This is fucking reality. If you actually wanted to help people, that's the end goal, right? That's the end goal. Calling it defund the police did not help.
There's also a danger of those kinds of slogans.
Standing there in front of a burning city talking about the mostly peaceful protests behind them, that doesn't help. That doesn't help. And look, I'm not one to lose sleep at night over angry, frustrated people looting Chase and fucking jewelry stores. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the show business of it. I'm talking about the politics of it. I'm talking about actually trying to reform the system of it. Those things don't help. They do not help.
Yeah, but I think Gina makes a good point, saying that I'll put up. Gina's getting a lot of airtime. It's not just because she's a patron; it's because she's active in the chat, and we like that kind of engagement. Disingenuous people would always say it's easy to oppose the motto. I tend to agree. I tend to say that, like, look, no matter what you call it, the bottom line is if you are advocating for shrinking the police departments, you are challenging capital in a way that the establishment just will not have. And they'll call. I mean, look, this is a media that tied themselves in knots, saying that Joe Biden didn't really mean it when he told Charlemagne, "You ain't black if you don't vote for me." Right? I mean, this is an establishment that just, oh no, he didn't actually mean that. He said, "If you don't vote for me, you ain't black." But we know Joe Biden's not a racist. He didn't really mean it. He was off the cuff. He's old, whatever. They explained the shit out of that away. Does that so they're not good faith actors. They're going to distort any slogan, any motto. The bottom line is they're against you on substance, and they're always going to undercut whatever effort you have to sort of redistribute resources to empower ordinary people such that the cops are less necessary, because policing people, putting cuffs on them, throwing them in the back of a car and taking them out of town is the quickest, simplest, easiest way for rich, urban white people mostly, to enjoy their lives in their gentrified neighborhoods. And those are the people that matter in this political system. Those are the people who vote, right? Those are the people who donate. Those are the people who consume corporate media. And they're always going to cater to them no matter what you call it. So, look, I take your point. We're going to wrap soon. I think it's a good point. I've said it myself. I think defund does present certain liabilities. But at the same time, I don't think it should be the role of progressive media to sort of tone police these activists in that way. So that's my last word. Do you have a last word before we tell everybody?
Get your fucking shine box.
Get your fucking shine box.
That's my last word.
All
Defund
right.
the police.
Now go home and get your fucking shine box. Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Take it easy.
That's what I have to say.
Take it easy. Kevin, I'll read Kevin's messages here because he's in the private chat.
Point.
And he says, I use two hashtags together, defund the police and fund civilization. There you go. I like that. Fuck the framing. I'm not a strategist. It's a demand. You won't get anything in Portland unless you start over. And then Keaton is right. Well, I appreciate that, Kevin. But again, I didn't see this as so much a debate as an exchange of ideas.
It's about strategy. Reform the police implies more money for training. Yeah. I agree on all of that. I'm talking about how do you actually achieve this politically, if at all. And I agree with Keaton. It's a hard lift any way that you slice it for the systemic reasons that he's talking about. I'm just saying you run it in a way that scares the shit out of the money. And this I don't agree with you on, Keaton. Look, man, you got the rich lady with.
I like how when he doesn't agree, he leans in as if he's telling me a secret, as if we're not on the air anymore. You're like, so I don't agree with you. Hey, listen.
It's between me and you.
Yeah, between me and you. Everybody, fuck off. We got something to say.
All right, man. I was given a tour over by Old St. Patrick's, and this woman, clearly with money, with the fucking Botox face and the fucking plumped up fake lips, walks up to me with the Ukraine ribbon on her lapel, and she asked me if this black slave who went on to be a saint was buried in that graveyard, and then starts explaining who he is. And she didn't come up to me to actually find out if he was there. She came up to me to signal her virtue,
Right,
by
to show off that she
demonstrating
knew this history. Right.
who this person was, and to show the people I was giving a tour to. Okay, those people will support reforming the police. They will, because they want to feel virtuous. They want to feel good about themselves. And those people make up a lot of the donor base of the Democratic Party. You've got to frame it in a way that Donald Duck over there with the fucking Ukraine ribbon is going to go along with. If you actually want to get it done.
Fewer cops on the street, if they say, okay, what do you mean by reform? We mean less money.
I
think a lot of them are going to say, whoa, no.
Threaten their safety. And that's why I say you can't have a vacuum. You can't have enough. Yes, their support will not survive the first percentage uptick in crime, but you can get them to support it if you frame it in a way that, no, we're going to have community policing or community de-escalation counselors. They have to know that it's not just going to be everyone for themselves, that it's going to be handled in a different way, and you're going to take care, because they want to think of themselves.
Yeah, but I just don't buy
liberal.
it, because it takes 5 seconds to explain that we're going to, as Kevin said, defund the police and fund civilization. That's such an easy thing to explain, to the point where I think if they would go for that, then they wouldn't be as afraid of this slogan. Now, if anything, I think this slogan gives them the sort of leeway to pretend that they think it's much worse than that it's much more drastic than it actually is. Like this slogan gives them the sort of moral cover to say, well, defund, you mean abolish? I'm not for that. And then they shut down the conversation. And then they never actually have to counter you when you say, no, we're going to cut the NYPD budget by 10%. We're not going to get rid of the NYPD altogether. Right? But to me, once again, I just don't think there's a whole lot of daylight between what defund the police actually means and people's deepest fear of what it means. I think, yes, are there some people who are going to think are going to be sort of, propagandized into thinking that means abolish the police? Sure. I don't think that's a large number of people. I think people living in Nolita, right, that area, I don't know if she was a local or whatever, but assuming that, I think they hear there's going to be fewer cops around. Right. There are going to be fewer cops around to keep the crazies off your ass. I think they're going to be scared by that, and I don't think they would go for
that. Well, you'd have a better chance. They're never going for defund the police.
All right, you know what?
Never.
Here's something we can do. Next time I'm in the city, this could actually be big. This could be good. We should do some man on the street interviews about this. Just find people and say, hey, what do you think about this?
Actually, I think that's a great idea.
And get ordinary people's opinion. When we say ordinary people, I mean people making $600,000 a year to rent a loft on fucking Grand Street or whatever. But get get some real.
Actually, it would be interesting to go into different parts of town. Like, I live in Harlem, and I interview people here, but then go down to FIDI and ask people what they think down by Wall Street.
Gina keeps asking us to get Revolutionary Blackout Network on the show. I would love to get them on the show.
Those guys are total posers, man.
Exactly. I would love to talk.
I lent that guy $10. He never gave it back to me, man.
That's I forget that Nick is one of the guys over there. Yeah, right, exactly. I would love to have them on the show. They're quite a bit bigger than us. I don't know if they would return our calls, but we could try. But
they might. We're getting bigger.
We're getting bigger there. If you want them to come on, gotta hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, share these streams. Patreon.com/do-dissidents or do-dissidents.substack.com. We are going to sign off in just a moment now, but I do want to thank our patrons and our paid Substack subscribers for making these programs possible here. Like I said, we added this midweek stream. We plan on adding more streams more often. The more support we get, the more views we get, the more shares we get, the more subs we get, the better and more easily we can put together these live streams. I want to thank Kevin for hanging out on the private chat and Judith for logging in. And I'm assuming our sound is coming through loud and clear, Judith, to you. I hope you had a good time watching this from inside our little studio here. But before we wrap, Russell, I did change our broadcast signal. So hopefully I was not buffering as much. Was my video better tonight?
Oh, yeah. No, smooth.
It was smooth? Okay, good.
Yeah,
All right.
no problems.
That's one problem we solved. Fixing civilization was going to have to wait a week, but at least we got this. At least we got the video.
Maybe two.
Exactly. All right, everybody. Well, thank you very much for watching. Thanks to our podcast listeners for listening. This will be up later in the week, and we'll see you guys all on Sunday. Sunday's episode might be pre-recorded and it might premiere at 7 p.m. or it might be live. I might have to go into the city on Sunday night. I'm not sure, but we will have a show for you either way on YouTube. So thank you guys very much. Be safe. Be well. We'll see you all next time.
Please clap.